Morning, everyone. My name is Martha King, and I am the Vice President of Programs and Projects at Farm Foundation, located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. Farm Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit working at the intersection of agriculture and society to address challenges that affect the entire food and ag value chain. Specifically, we are an accelerator of practical solutions for agriculture, accelerating people and ideas into action. This year, we are celebrating 90 years of doing this work. Thank you for joining us today for the U.S. Farm Households Social and Economic Needs and the Future of Agriculture Conference. We are glad to be taking this step with all of you in gathering the data necessary to illuminate the linkages between social programs and policies and farm sector health. Thank you also to our co-organizers for making this event possible: the National Farm Medicine Center, The Ohio State University, Colorado State University, and the USDA Economic Research Service. It's a pleasure to be joined by this great group of experts who will set the tone for the day. To begin with, I'd like to introduce Shoshana Inwood, rural sociologist and associate professor in the School of Environment and Natural Resources at The Ohio State University, who will let us know how the day will go.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to welcome you to the conference. Our organizing committee is a partnership between the Farm Foundation, USDA, ERS, The Ohio State University, the National Farm Medicine Center, and the Colorado State University. This conference represents a paradigm shift in how we approach farm economics and how we support the agriculture sector as we turn our attention to the ways in which social and economic needs of the farm household affect farm well-being, sustainability, and resilience in the agriculture sector. The U.S. has an aging and shrinking farm population. Less than 2% of the population farms, and American farmers are an average age of 57.5 years old. These numbers pose a real risk to our national food, fiber, and fuel supply. To address these trends, both federal and state governments have invested in growing the next generation of farmers and ranchers through a variety of different programs. These efforts have largely focused on access to land, capital, and credit, all of which are incredibly important, but they've overlooked the ways in which social and household level issues, such as access to health insurance and healthcare, childcare, affordable housing, nutrition and food security, and retirement also affect farm sustainability and rural prosperity. While social and household issues have always been present within farm families, they have largely remained invisible in our current approach to farm economics. Today, we make the invisible visible. At its heart, today's conference is about social sustainability in the food and agriculture sector. Most of us are familiar with the three-legged stool approach to sustainability, which emphasizes the importance of environmental, economic, and social sustainability. We're most often comfortable defining and researching economic and environmental sustainability by focusing on topics like production, marketing, business planning, and land access, while social sustainability remains the most opaque and difficult to operationalize. In fact, we have often conflated social sustainability with economic profitability, assuming that if farmers just produce more and increase profitability, they will have an improved quality of life. However, social sustainability is much more complex than a simple economic equation. And today in this conference, we are taking up the challenge to expand the way we define, research, and support social sustainability and quality of life in the farm sector, while also recognizing that social sustainability is in fact a critical linchpin that determines farm viability and, more broadly, how resilient our food and agriculture system is. Part of the reason there has been so little research into farm social and household needs is because our current approaches to farm economics treat the farm household and farm enterprise as separate entities. However, as you will see today, in reality, the two are intertwined. There's been decades of research in rural studies demonstrating the deep interconnections and interreliance between the enterprise and the household. Rural sociologists and anthropologists have consistently shown how farm households play a key role in bolstering the farm business by at times providing unpaid labor and foregoing household needs. Today, we are expanding this vein of research by asking how is the farm business impacted when farmers themselves are experiencing challenges in meeting their household's social and economic needs. In our current approach to supporting the farm economy, we tend to judge the success or failure of individual operators based on if they are good producers, good accountants, or good marketers. And we don't take into account the larger social, economic, and government systems they are embedded in. This includes the social safety net policies and programs that support their own underlying social needs, such as birth, maternity, retirement, unemployment, poverty, illness, accidents, and death. These are issues that affect all Americans, and it is critical to understand how they affect the farm sector. In the agriculture sector, social and household economic needs affect farm production and marketing systems, labor needs, farm safety, farm profitability, family economics, farm mental health, and quality of life. These issues affect all of agriculture, regardless of farm size, production system, or geographic location. In the work I do studying how access to affordable quality childcare and health insurance affect farm economic development and quality of life, the issues have become even more acute and visible with COVID-19. We are living in a period of volatility, and it is critical to understand how issues like childcare and health insurance, which can be conceived of as ordinary stressors, have the power to amplify extraordinary stressors, such as extreme weather, commodity market volatility, or public health issues. The significance of these issues is highlighted by both the American Farm Bureau Federation and National Farmers Union, including access to affordable quality childcare as part of their 2023 Farm Bill priorities, and the Expanding Childcare in Rural America Act of 2023 Farm Bill Marker Bill, introduced with bipartisan support in both the U.S. Senate and House. Farmers are not a homogeneous population. There are a diversity of experiences and solutions to the issues farm families face. To this point, we have brought researchers and practitioners together to dive deeper into the issues and to shine light on the different ways social and household economic issues affect farmers. Today, we are primarily focused on farmers. However, these issues are just as significant for farm workers and the individuals who work across the food and agriculture supply chain. As we move forward in this work, it is critical to forge new partnerships with researchers and practitioners working with farm workers to better understand how social and household issues affect the social and economic well-being of workers across the supply chain, in addition to farm productivity and overall agricultural economics. While today's presentation centers on the experience of U.S. farmers, we would like to welcome the many international participants attending today. The global reach of this conference reflects the international scholarship that points to farmers in other countries facing parallel issues. The issues we are discussing today are not bounded by national boundaries. On a personal note, as a land-grant university scientist, I've had the privilege of traveling across the country, interviewing and surveying thousands of farmers and ranchers across our great nation to understand how social and household economic needs affect both their economic development and quality of life. More often than not, farmers have teared up and said, "Thank you for asking about this. No one ever asks us about this." For us, the organizers of this conference, today is part of a larger effort to make sure that research does not just sit on the library shelf, but gives voice to the lived realities of America's farmers that will be used to inform new research, policies, and programs that bolster our agricultural sector and rural communities. As an organizing committee, we have been overwhelmed by your response and interest in being a part of this event. Participants today represent a wide range of academia, private industry, nonprofits, and government. We do not want this to be a death by PowerPoint experience. We've purposely built in time for conversation and networking. We invite you all to be active participants. As you listen and participate in the presentations and conversations today, we ask that you reflect on the ways in which your experiences are similar or different. What are you hearing that surprised you? Based on your work and experiences, what would you like to add to the conversation? How might you change your approach to the work you do in the food and agriculture sector? And likewise, what can we learn from you? We hope that you participate in the networking sessions, and please take advantage of opportunities to ask questions and share reflections. We encourage you to reach out to the speakers and other participants to forge new relationships and collaborations as we work together to find new approaches to supporting the next generation of farmers and ranchers, for building prosperous, vibrant rural communities, and for ensuring the nation's food, fiber, and fuel supply.
Thank you, Shoshana. We are honored to be joined by USDA Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Xochitl Torres-Small, who has provided a recorded message.
Good morning. I'm USDA Deputy Secretary Soch. Welcome to today's conference on the social and economic well-being of farm households. Prior to serving as Deputy Secretary, I served as Undersecretary for Rural Development. USDA's mission to advance equity and opportunity in and for rural communities is personal to me. The presentations and discussions today will focus on the interplay between the farm business and the farm household to develop a deeper understanding of how household challenges impact the farm business. The conference will address challenges related to healthcare, childcare, access to credit, and financial well-being to inform improvements to existing social programs and policies that support farm sector profitability and resilience. The goals of this conference directly intersect with the mission and efforts undertaken at USDA to support farmers, their households, U.S. agriculture, and rural communities. Within USDA, our Rural Development Agency works to improve the economy and quality of life in rural America through a broad variety of programs and initiatives. During my time with the mission area, I've seen how a number of these programs that are focused on the care economy address the topics covered in today's conference. In recent years, the physical infrastructure supporting rural communities has suffered ongoing challenges, contributing to a lack of access to health care and childcare. Since 2010, over 100 rural hospitals have closed, and many more are vulnerable to closure. Many rural hospitals don't have intensive care unit beds, and rural areas are more likely to have a shortage of primary care health professionals. At USDA, we're working to address this crisis by supporting rural hospitals' financial viability through our Community Facilities Program and the administration of COVID relief grants to support rural healthcare facilities and improve the long-term viability of rural healthcare providers. Similar challenges extend to accessing rural child care in rural America. Rural communities have undertaken creative and diverse approaches to address these child care needs, and USDA supports this creativity by helping communities explore flexible solutions to child care access. USDA's Rural Development partnered with the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families to develop a joint resource guide that encourages investment in high-quality, affordable childcare and early learning opportunities. In response to the tremendous need in this area, Rural Development increased community facilities obligations for child care facilities in rural areas from $864,000 in fiscal year 2020 to over $9 million in fiscal year 2021. These investments and collaboration aim to bolster childcare options and increase the supply of childcare and early learning facilities, which are fundamental to supporting economic growth in rural America. My comments today have touched on a few examples of the challenges to rural communities and the support provided by USDA programming. But there are many additional ways in which USDA engages with rural communities on other challenges, including affordable housing, broadband internet access, and financial support for farmers and the agricultural sector. Thank you for the opportunity to highlight some of the work we're doing right here at USDA. As you participate in today's conference, I encourage you to think deeply and develop partnerships to address the challenges facing rural America, farm households, and the agricultural sector.
We are now going to move into our first panel discussion of the day, which will be moderated by Matt Russell, State Executive Director of the USDA Iowa Farm Service Agency. He will be joined by Dr. Gabrielle Roche McNally, Director of the Women for the Land Program at American Farmland Trust, Adam Alson, owner of Alson Farms and President of Appleseed Childhood Education, Mary Saunders Bouland, Farmer Services Director for Rural Advancement Foundation International USA, and Graham Unanks Rufenacht, Policy Director at Rural Vermont. Hand it over to you, Matt.
All right, Martha, thank you very much. And thank you, Farm Foundation, for putting this together and all the partners who helped out. I am part of a proud member of the Biden-Harris administration in my role leading Iowa Farm Service Agency. I'm also a farmer. And my husband and I farm in Iowa. We do retail agriculture, 110 acres, small scale, direct to consumers. But I also grew up on a commodity farm in Western Iowa, about 1,000-acre commodity farm, corn and soybeans, cattle. And in the 1980s, we made it through the farm crisis with our family farm intact. Because we were able to get a loan from at that time Farmers Home Administration, but we got one of the USDA loans that allowed us to bridge between when our bank failed as part of the 80 farm crisis and just the stress of trying to farm at that time. My dad was a full-time farmer. My mom she had a hair salon in her home on the farm, so multiple income streams there. One of the things that I'm really interested today is the combination of multiple income streams for families. And I'm an example of the wealth creation, the intergenerational wealth creation that can happen through agriculture and farming. And for the vast majority of American farmers, farming is not their only income source for their household. And it is a very wide range of being a small part of the income stream to almost the whole thing, to the whole thing. So I think that's an interesting component. There are so many disruptions happening in the economy right now for all Americans. Farmers are part of that. Lots of opportunity in that disruption, but also lots of challenges. If we just look at the Affordable Care Act as an amazing policy that changed the landscape for small business owners, certainly for farmers, providing more healthcare, more security, getting rid of pre-existing conditions, just things like that. So I'm excited to be part of this panel today. I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. However, I do want to let everybody know that we want to get as many ideas and as many concepts out there. So if I interrupt somebody, if I cut somebody off, it is not because they're not saying something important. It's just because they're getting to the end of their kind of timeline that we want to move on to make sure that we have all voices heard. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gabrielle to introduce herself and make a few opening comments.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt, for that introduction. And actually, I had the pleasure, I don't know if Matt remembers, but I did my PhD in Iowa at Iowa State and had the pleasure of visiting his farm, his husband's farm, when I was on one of my first courses as part of a sustainable agriculture student in Iowa State. So yeah, that's a bit of an introduction for myself. Dr. Gabrielle Resch McNally. I am currently working for American Farmland Trust. Prior to that, I did my PhD in Iowa and worked for the USDA. My PhD is in sociology and sustainable agriculture, and I worked for the USDA Climate Hubs as a fellow, and am now the director of our Women for the Land initiative here at American Farmland Trust. Just a little background for those of you who may not be familiar with American Farmland Trust. We're a national nonprofit, been around for over 40 years, really got started in the business and the work of preserving farmland, and that work has evolved. Still very committed to preserving farmland. Many of you maybe have seen our bumper stickers, no farms, no food, but we need to preserve and support the farm base if we're going to have any of the other good benefits that we want on farms. Increasingly, our work explores the practices and the sort of sustainability of those farms. How can we steward and care for that land, particularly in the context of a changing climate? And then what we like to talk about is our sort of third part of our mission is really the people. How do we keep people and get people on the land? How do we think about this sea change that's happening with a retiring, aging farm population and this younger farm population that wants access to land and opportunities in agriculture? And my program, Women for the Land, is really focused on meeting the needs of women farmers, landowners, and increasingly folks who work on farms. But again, a lot of my comments here today will probably be mostly focused on farmers and landowners and not farm workers. Just to kind of give a little context of, what brings me to this work, because I work at a national scale, talk with and engage with thousands of farmers, both through my own work and then my wonderful staff and colleagues who I work with who are doing programming across the country. Some of the things that are really kind of emerging as we think about what are some of the ways that social and economic viability are showing up for people or the challenges therein. And so some of the themes that I'm kind of sitting with this morning, thinking about how these are impacting particularly women producers. I'm thinking, of course, about the power of networks and connection and feelings of isolation. So how are people sort of caring for their social community needs? That's a big piece of what our program at Women for the Land does, is connecting women to one another, to their sort of local networks, but also connecting them to resource providers who can support their success. So that's a critical piece of those sort of kind of connective tissues. How are people finding and accessing resources, particularly women and other underserved producers? Some of the other themes I'm thinking about are kind of mental health challenges and the ways in which the pandemic, but then also economic challenges, as we're going to talk about today, and access to childcare, access to healthcare, how those things sort of compound and impact people's mental health, sort of at a personal level, but also at a family scale as well. And then finally, I think the other piece that I think kind of connects here for me is we've all experienced such extreme and variable weather this year and many years prior. I think one of the things that continues to come up with the farmers that we work with is just the impacts of these extremes, whether it's flooding in Vermont, whether it's fires and drought here in the West where I'm based, and many other sort of multitude of impacts that folks are experiencing, and how that is compounding there are already the challenges they're facing with increased costs of operations, challenges with finding accessible and affordable land, and childcare, healthcare, these other things. So these kind of compacting factors. So these are some of the things that I'm thinking about and I'm hearing from the folks that I work with. I should say I just have a giant garden here. I'm not a farmer, but I chat with farmers a lot and engage in the community, and hear a lot through our work. So I think I'll leave my intro comments there. Thanks, Matt. Pass it back to you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. We'll go to Adam now, if you want to do a quick intro and give us your thoughts.
Yes, my name is Adam Alson. I live in Rensselaer, Indiana, which is halfway between Chicago and Indianapolis, small rural community of about 6,000 people. I am third generation corn and soybean farmer, grew up in Rensselaer. I am also co-founder and president of a nonprofit organization called Appleseed Childhood Education. Our mission is to increase the availability of affordable, quality childcare in Rensselaer, Indiana, and surrounding communities. Over the last 3 years, we've come to the point where in March of this year, we opened the first licensed child care center in Rensselaer, Apple Tree Rensselaer, through a diverse private-public partnership that include partnerships with local employers, the local regional healthcare system, local government, and private philanthropy. All of this comes down to, from my perspective, is we need to have strong rural communities. I love where I live. Farmers love where they live throughout the Midwest and throughout the country. The problem I see, and the thing that I think there's also an opportunity as well, is to say our rural communities are the backbone of attracting and retaining farmers currently and then going into the future. The challenges that rural communities face from a viability perspective are different than they were 20 or 30 years ago. They've been mentioned already multiple times, and I think we all know them. I come from the thing that we've worked on and I've worked on quite a bit is the childcare space, but it also includes affordable housing. It includes rural healthcare. It includes broadband access. It includes all of these things that we all know. But we can also, I think, figure out how to solve these problems like we have for rural communities in the United States for a long, long time. Thanks, Matt.
Adam, thank you very much. Let's go to Mary, if you want to do a quick introduction and give us your thoughts as we start.
Okay, hi everybody, and I'm happy to be here. My name is Mary Boulan, and I'm the Farmer Services Director at RAFI, which is a farm advocacy nonprofit based in Pittsboro, North Carolina. I myself live in Black Mountain, which is up in the mountain part of Western North Carolina, where my partner and I run a small farm, as well as juggling 2 jobs and raising 2 kids. And so this topic is near and dear to my heart. as a person. And I also, in my role at RAFI, work with our Farmers of Color Network. And a lot of the work that we do with that program is receive applications and award small grants to farmers of color across the Southeast. I guess, Shoshana earlier mentioned quality of life. I think this is a really interesting conversation. In the dynamics that I'm seeing, many of our farmers are newer farmers, and they're coming to agriculture because they see the value of connection with the land, and they see the promise of that creation of community through food and through working on the land. And at the same time, there's this paradox of the stress of being a farmer, the financial, physical, emotional stress. And I think that's a really kind of challenging place for people to be in. And the people that we're working with are also doing some really creative and awesome things that I think are really inspiring. So I'll leave it there, but nice to be here. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. Graham, if you want to give us an introduction and your thoughts as we open.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. And my name is Graham Unings Rufernagt. I use he, him pronouns. I am the policy director at an organization called Rural Vermont. I'm a first-generation farmer, grazer, and I do other seasonal agricultural work, agricultural research, education, and organizing, and I provide childcare to our children as well. I live in Marshfield with my partner. We have a 3.5-year-old daughter, and we have 2 infant twins. I've been working as a part-time employee for Rural Vermont since 2017. I was a board member before that. I've been farming for over a decade or 15 years. Rural Vermont was founded in 1985. It's a statewide member-based farmer and farm worker-led not-for-profit organization based in Montpelier, Vermont, which is the capital here. We work primarily at the local and state levels, but we also advocate and collaborate in national and international spaces through our membership in and participation in the National Family Farm Coalition in La Via Campesina. Our mission is to organize, educate, and advocate in collaboration with local and global movements to strengthen the social, ecological, and economic health of the agrarian communities that connect us all. And though we're not, healthcare, childcare, elder care, or housing experts, we are agricultural and ecological organizers, advocates, and educators who see these needs and who work with people on the ground, who work with organizations who lead on these issues and connect folks to these experts, to policymakers, and more. To answer the question, we experience and see and hear social and economic needs in our communities as primary essential needs for everyone, though our focus is primarily on farmers and farm workers. We see the needs as painfully and unnecessarily poorly met in the United States, especially in comparison with similar countries around the world and given the resources and wealth in the US, whether this be with respect to childcare, healthcare, education, elder care. And these needs are disproportionately impact particular populations and segments of the populations, whether that be farmers and farm workers or communities of color and indigenous folks within those communities, women within those communities. These impacts can vary from, affecting stress, mental health, farm viability, environmental outcomes, access to land and farming, all kinds of things. And I'm glad we're all here to talk about this together. These are issues that I struggle with, and I know many people around the country struggle with. So thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Graham. As we go to the next thing, I'm going to ask a question, and then I'll just call on you to work through this. Take a few minutes to kind of burrow in just a little bit specifically. So, what specific, if you could think of a particularly important example, what type of challenge do you see farm families experience when meeting their social and economic needs? So maybe, what do you see as really important, or, if it's a couple things, and I'll go ahead and we'll just do the same order. So Gabrielle, I'll call on you first, but what type of challenge or challenges do you see farm families experience when meeting their social and economic needs? And just take a couple minutes.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm excited to hear what my colleagues here have to say and for the conversation. I think the pieces that, I might back up for a minute, in terms of this question, the first thing that comes to my mind is sort of, and Shoshana kind of mentioned it in her introductory statements about sort of the access, people's ability to sort of access and engage and choose agriculture and the challenges that come from that, sort of some of the isolation in rural communities, totally agree with Adam, sort of this importance, the backbone of rural communities, and yet there are a lot of services that are missing in those rural places. And so the first thing that comes to mind is like, I'm seeing a next generation of farmers coming in, particularly women, particularly farmers of color, and sort of the USDA national statistics will support that in terms of seeing a more diverse group of people wanting access, connection, community, land. So just sort of being able to access, particularly for folks who don't have that intergenerational wealth, sort of being a piece of it. And then as those folks who tend to be younger, earlier in their careers, their family life, trying to access their sort of basic needs around healthcare, childcare. I've heard a lot of the women that we work with want to, women and folks at our farms, but of course I work a lot with women, chat about sort of wanting to bring their families to the farm, seeing agriculture as a place where you can have more of that community life, whether it's intergenerational or bringing in the next generation. Then I think what people come up against is that's really hard to do. It's really hard, like blessings to Graham and sort of having twins, right? Like trying to manage and bring your kids into the farm, onto the farm. There's sort of this bucolic image that we have in America about the family farm, but the reality of that is tricky. The safety of that is tricky. The reality of managing animals, land, and also taking care of your children. So, and then how does that sort of labor get sort of distributed across the family? Who's sort of bearing the burden of that, and how is that impacting their ability to get chores done? So I think those sort of basic, like people wanting, especially for the newer generation, to get started, and then seeing these sort of barriers to entry. And then I think, and then I would just say that I feel like there's a piece around connection and community that is less maybe a theme through sort of social and economic viability, but I think it is sort of a piece that's preventing people from feeling connected and supported. And so that's certainly a big piece of work that we're doing to try to get people access so they can find someone who has in-home childcare, so they can find resources in their community to bolster their success. So those are a couple of challenges that really like ping for me in your question, Matt.
Thanks, Gabrielle. So Adam, I'll call on you next, but just a heads up, when we get done with this round, I'm gonna open it up for you guys to respond to each other as well before we go on to the next question. So Adam, if you want to talk about those, some specific challenges.
Yeah, so where I am in the Midwest, row crop farming, I'm in corn and soybean land, right? So I come from a slightly different perspective, right? Where it's what I see is right, these larger farms and larger farmers and larger farm families that need the workforce to do the things that they need to do, right? And in a space that continues to become more technologically advanced, right? Which means we need from a workforce perspective for agriculture, right? A maybe potentially slightly higher, you need more education, right? You need people that are qualified to do the things from a technological perspective that maybe they didn't need to do 20 or 30 years ago. And, what I see is that we have, and it doesn't matter at all whether it's right, the 2-acre market garden farmer, right, doing retail farming and like making it go, or the farmer that farms 5,000 acres right in Iowa, right? The challenges are still the same, I think, and those challenges are that, right, people want to be in a place that they want to, that has the things that they need, and those things aren't actually all that different in any of those communities or any of those people. And I think the common thread, however we all do it, the common thread that we all have is we love living in rural America. We love living in small communities. We love knowing our neighbors. And those things, that is a big part of being in agriculture, right? And being a farmer. The challenge is people require things. What people want to require to have a fruitful and full life is different. It's different now, and that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, right? There's these challenges, but there's also an opportunity to, from a community perspective, come together, from local community perspective, come together, from state and regional, right, farm associations and farm groups and conferences like this and starting to say, hey, like, how we all see the same thing. How do we get to the next step? And how do we start solving them? How do we start advocating? How do we tell our story better? And, actually, I think like a very important piece of this, which Shoshana mentioned in her introductory comments, is that, not everyone knows the stories here. We are on this call. We know them, right? We know them. It's how do we make other people know them as well? And one thing that, I think the idea of, increased interest in rural communities and in farm families around what those challenges are, and putting them in a way that policymakers and people and entities outside of agriculture can understand is extremely important going forward. Thanks, Matt.
Adam, thank you very much. Mary, what do you see as the challenges, specific challenges, opportunities families are facing with social and economic needs?
Sure. Well, a few things come to mind. For one, I want to name, the specific issue of parental leave, paid leave, which I have seen it for a long time. I've been in agriculture for a long time, and we experience this at home. But I think it's something that, we live in this economy where, in this brutal food chain, depending on who you work for, depends how long you can stay home with your kid. Or if you're farming, what support is available to you to help as a manager of a farm to feel that your kid is doing well and being raised by somebody that you trust. So that's something that, we've worked with farmers who are work trading with their CSA members to provide childcare when they come to the farm, and instead of volunteering pulling weeds, they're like hanging out with the baby. But that's something that I think is a major issue that has not been solved by policy that I can see, and it continues with the farmers that I'm working with right now. I think paid leave in general is a huge piece of people being able to maintain their mental health, being able to get away from the farm and feel like things aren't going to fall apart. And do you have somebody who can come in? I think there's this issue of expertise that Adam mentioned, like who can step in the farm if you need to get away. And like there's a problem of sort of the loss of knowledge, of community knowledge and community involvement with each other's farms. And that has to do, I think, a lot with the disbursement of farms and large farm size, as well as the loss of agricultural knowledge overall in our communities. I guess the other thing related to mental health, and this is maybe going to sound kind of woo-woo, but I do live near Asheville, so I think a lot about health and the fact that many of our folks come to agriculture because they are drawn to the health that agriculture can provide, but there's no health without wholeness. And so we have this, I mentioned the paradox of like wanting to farm, but being just like beat down by all of the other issues that are affecting many other segments of our society in terms of just our economic system. But within the communities that I'm working with, you can add the stresses of being in racially marginalized communities, being discriminated against, being invisible in the farming world. And I think even having lack of support from their own families and communities and understanding, because, if you choose to farm in some communities where your ancestors were sharecroppers and enslaved, it's hard necessarily to find the community support for that endeavor. And I think that can be really hard on people. So I think what Gabrielle is talking about, this need for connection and community to find the people that understand why you're doing it and what you're doing and want to help support you do that, I think is really important.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I got.
Hey, thank you very much, Mary, or Gabrielle. No, Mary. Now we're going to Gabrielle. So, Gabrielle, if you'd want to address a specific issue that you want to lift up.
I want to make sure Graham's voice gets in here with the challenges question.
It will.
Graham? Okay. Yeah, I think I kind of, covered some of this in my comments. I think the piece that I sort of wanted to sort of riff on for a minute really was about sort of, I think what Adam said about sort of not everyone knows these stories. And what is coming up for me is just how I think in the sort of sustainable agriculture space that I've been a part of for many years, there has been a sort of a slow to come to this conversation about how critical things like childcare, like healthcare access, vibrant rural communities, how we sort of like support the broader, not just like what's happening on the farm with the practices or access to resources. I think we can have this very narrow view of what is sort of like farm related work and what is important. And you can see that with what is largely funded in the Farm Bill and how we've sort of approached priority setting there. And I think just personally, I've gone through a personal transformation of seeing how critical, I've often thought of some of these sort of viability and sort of farm household issues as something like that's important, but it's not like the stuff that I'm focused on,
Right.
like we're focused on.
And thank you, I'm sorry, I did call on you a second time for this question, and I apologize for that.
Okay.
Graham was up next. Thanks for pointing that out, and we'll get back to you. Graham, if you want to address the specific challenge there.
Sure. I'll just start by, I guess, putting some agreement forth with Mary and just saying, I think that, some of the problems we see are sort of predictable and common to outside of the ag population, though they are certainly unique to the circumstances in the ag population, from the average age of the farmers to reliance on people's body and the risk of injury to low income in farming, et cetera. But really policies like guaranteed long-term paid leave, as Mary mentioned, publicly funded universal healthcare, universal higher education, they're not controversial in our peer countries and would greatly affect the baseline of needs, not just for farmers. It doesn't mean that would accomplish everything, but it would certainly raise the baseline. And to get into some really specific circumstances, I think one that I was thinking about in preparation for this is I visited a small vegetable farmer a couple of years ago here in Vermont. They had one child at the time, another on the way. They'd been leasing land for their entire career as a farmer and moving every few years between sites because the affordability of housing and land was so challenging. Their income wasn't that high. And they were at the point of deciding whether or not to stop farming, despite this amazing experience they had in their skill set, because they were at the struggle of living on the edge of qualifying for Medicaid or facing health insurance premiums, which were unaffordable, and wanting to make enough income to finally afford their own farm and land and meet other needs. And at the same time, they're trying to navigate and plan how to afford and access childcare for their current child in the dynamic of one parent not working or trying to work to provide that service. I think this dynamic of sort of living between not making enough money to afford healthcare or housing or land and making too much money to qualify for those Medicaid or other benefits that you need is a very consistent issue, as well as the struggles combining that with accessing and affording childcare in a society which doesn't afford reasonable paid leave opportunities. We could, there's a number of other specific things from the healthcare enrollment process, to insufficient coverage, high deductibles and copays, to the unique challenges of people who don't have citizenship and are working on our farm and are sort of invisibilized or have the threat of deportation they're facing all the time, and accessing childcare or healthcare for those folks. Student loan debt we hear about, mental health challenges, isolation. I think a lot of stuff that's come up is right there, and I'll leave it there and we can keep going.
All right, Graham, thank you very much. I'm going to let all of you kind of respond to each other. And I think if you've got, I think you have like a question format or the chat. If those who are participating and watching, if you have a question, you want to throw that in, we'll address some of those as we have time. But I want to respond to the panel. I'm going to go back to Adam. You said something that I thought was really interesting. You were talking about challenges, but you were also talking about opportunities. And for me, that was one of the things I heard is that, and I like to say this a lot, challenges are opportunities, right? Like we can just deal with challenges, but when we come to the solutions to those challenges, those can be tremendous opportunities. And I think we're really at a time where we're seeing a lot of those opportunities emerge. And I think, Graham, you identified something really interesting there, and that is we're seeing across the economy for everybody this threshold of income versus supports, whether it's SNAP benefits or Medicaid on the public health, the health side, trying to find that balance and a lot of whipsaw back and forth in terms of policy. So, one of the things I see as a real opportunity is we're hiring at USDA and most of our jobs are out in rural communities at Rural Development, Farm Service Agency, and Natural Resources Conservation Service. So thinking about how careers in off-farm tie with careers on-farm, and I can tell you that in Iowa, I'm just anecdotally, I need to figure this out for sure, but at least half of our 600 employees are actively engaged in farming. They're either farming themselves or they're farming with a child or a parent, right? Very involved in farming operation, and somebody in that family has a full-time position at USDA. So I think just teasing out some of those things that I heard. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Adam. If you have any comments that you want to make regarding where the conversation's at right now.
I think, I think kind of where we are, that I think it's important to, continuing to highlight policy, at state and national levels, right, and highlight these issues. I don't think rural communities have time to wait for policy to change, right? I think there's an opportunity for local communities and local, and farmers as being a part of those communities, to make change in their communities and to highlight how these things do look when they are different, when they're not challenges, when they're viewed as opportunities, and when real change happens. And I hope we've done that with Appleseed in the childcare space in one community in Rensselaer, in our community in Rensselaer, Indiana. And, it's, to some extent, it will take local organizing and local support of local initiatives to show how these things can be different, to then highlight policy as well, right? And it's living in a rural community is great, and we all love it, right? And that's why we're here. And and we have to show how everybody else how awesome it is too. And I think there's opportunities there, Matt. I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say on this.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Mary, let's go to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, just a couple of things. First of all, I love the country life, and we live in a pretty small town. And a lot of the folks that we're working with are also, considered to be urban farmers. I think our farm technically is also an urban farm. And I think that I just want to highlight that as an area where more support, I think overall is needed. We all understand there's sort of multifaceted benefits of agriculture that are not just large scale production, but education, what you're talking about, Adam, like a lot of these spaces are really important community spaces and education spaces and places for people to come together, intergenerationally as well. A lot of the folks I would say that we're working with, they farm, but they're also trying to create, many of them, formal education programs at their farms, as a piece of added income, but also because they really see this coming back to the land as something that has been missing from their communities, that there's a deficit of connection, and that they want to help provide that resource. So I think what you're doing, Adam, is also reflected in a lot of the communities that are farming at much smaller scales that we're working on. So that's something that I think is just really exciting. And again, I'm not. There's a lot of great policy folks at RAFI, and I am not one of them. I am more of like the direct, I come out to farms, I work directly with farmers. And so I tend to agree that I think a lot of the examples of success are going to come from communities. And then the policy people are going to notice and then write something about it. That's what I've seen, I guess, in terms of history. And so I do think that there are really great examples of farmers that we're working with now who are creating these types of community spaces, these educational spaces with the farms. And it's a sustainable economic model for them, but it's also a real resource for the communities where they live.
Right. Thank you, Mary. Graham, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it was interesting. I think I read a study in the last year or so that said that beginning farmers tend to stay farming longer if they farm part-time and work part-time than if they go full-time into farming. And I think, this you rightly bring up, and I think Shoshana and Florence's research has really shown like the prevalence of people who either rely on full-time work themselves while farming, or a partner on their farm working full-time to achieve benefits like healthcare or retirement, or just the income enough to keep doing what they're doing. But I don't think that's necessarily something we should champion. And I think it's actually a part of the problem, one of the reasons we see such a marked decline in the percentage of population farming in this country over the last 100 years. And we should really talk about why do people need to farm and work another full-time job to meet their economic needs? Like that's actually problematic, I would say. And I absolutely agree that we can't wait around for policy to change, that working with people on the ground and reducing harm is something we absolutely need to do. But I would certainly not want us to sweep under the rug what other countries have proven and demonstrated, which is that things like healthcare and childcare are more affordable, have better outcomes, and are more accessible in countries where they're publicly afforded to people that are in the US right now. And so there is a great gains we can make there. And I'm happy to talk more about on the ground policy solutions and grassroots organizing solutions as well in the last question that's going to be asked here. But I think that we need to be able to carry both of these ideas at the same time and work towards them.
Yeah. Thank you, Graham. Gabrielle, if you have some thoughts.
I'm happy to start jumping into the policy conversation.
Absolutely.
I'll jump there. I have so many good things said, and I want to have a longer conversation. But I think I'm also not the policy person or policy people at my organization, but I've really been excited about some of the things. I think I would just want to echo like some of the pieces around acknowledging sort of all this invisible labor that people do, and then so the requirements of having this off-farm job. I just want to echo like Graham. I think that's well said. Like we sort of require people to have double, triple burdens to sort of make it all work. I also want to just rise up, like we've got to have more support for people and the care work that they do for their families, which disproportionately falls to women and for folks of color. How can we compensate or support people to do those things, whether it's elder care, child care, in addition to having access to those things off farm? So how are we compensating people for that? And I'm excited about sort of creative policy ways to do that. But I just want to lift up a couple of things that I think are exciting right now. There's the Expanding Child Care in Rural America Act of 2023. Brown and Gluesenkamp, have been championing this. I'm excited to see AFT and Farm Bureau have signed on, knowing that we need more access to affordable and quality childcare. Pingree just put forth the Women in Agriculture Act with other legislators as well to sort of create a liaison with USDA to support women producers and ranchers. I think there's exciting sort of acknowledgement of their role and how some of these issues intersect. At AFT, we've been really promoting and thinking about an Office of Small Farms as through our Farm Bill advocacy. How can we get more resources to smaller scale? Not to say, of course, that different scales don't face these issues, but we know particularly small, diversified, women-run, BIPOC-run producers are smaller scale, more sort of reliant on that family labor. How can we get them more resources that are tailored to their needs, knowing that they're meeting a huge sort of economic and rural quality of life sort of need in our society, but they're often our programs at USDA, let's be real, largely favor the larger scale producers. So I'm really excited about that work. And then we're also championing a Farmer to Farmer Education Act, which is really around trying to foster those connections and support peer-to-peer education. Again, that's not just on sort of viability, but I think it connects back to community connection, rural viability, and health. So I'm excited about some of the work. I think there's really cool ways in which the conversation is shifting about how we have to address some of these other farm viability, sort of economic and social viability pieces if we're going to have a sustainable agriculture that meets the food needs, the climate needs of our present and future reality. So some glimmers of hope there.
Right. Thank you, Gabrielle. We're kind of getting to lightning round. So thank you, Gabrielle. Let those kind of be your closing comments. Just a couple of things in the questions I want to lift up. And if the other three, if you want to address them, or if there's time, Gabrielle, to come back. Some real questions about connections. We've talked about connections. Any examples of those of how the social connections, either in programs or efforts. Also, in terms of just programs in general, of the things that we're talking about, are there some specific programs out there that anybody wants to elevate? There was also a comment about historically the idea of having farmers mostly be just farmers is kind of a new phenomena, that historically farming households have had multiple income streams. So just lifting that up, certainly Graham laying out the interest of moving towards a preferred future and what that looks like. But also that whole conversation about, well, what can we do right now? So what are the opportunities now? Can we lean into those, as well as what do we develop? And that's kind of the last point as well. What do we develop? What are some ideas to get to that preferred future? And the last thing I want to say before I turn it over to the other three is it was also mentioned in the comments about student loans and of course childcare, healthcare. If we look at this, we've had big conversations as a country about these very things across the entire economy, for rural areas, for urban areas, for all folks. And I think it really is an opportunity to ground the conversation about farmers in this larger context, because certainly we've even made the effort to try to do some things on student loans and some pushback on that, and then some push forward. And how is that beneficial to farming families specifically? When I talk with farmers and farmer groups in Iowa, childcare is always coming up. Healthcare is always coming up. So with that, I'll turn it over. Graham, let's let you go ahead and make some closing comments.
Sure. Yeah, I think that note about, what's it called, pluriactivity history. I mean, yeah, I think, generalist economies make sense, but I think it's sort of a distraction from the point. It doesn't capture the type of economy we have now, the type of farming we have now, the type of activity. I would agree that ideally people could practice all types of things, and that smithing and all those things are parts of sort of living in a land, in a community. I think big picture, the question about policy you just brought up is like, if we don't all put some effort towards passing these universal publicly funded policies, it's not going to happen. We all just sit in our sectors and work on little issues that are specific to the people we work with, and we don't get in the same boat. Things aren't going to happen. We really need to focus on that. From an on the ground perspective, there's a lot we can do. I think we need to align with other organizations that are experts. I think we can support development of policy, of infrastructure on the ground. We can have listening sessions. We can support childcare cooperatives. People talk about alternative land access cooperatives. I live in a land co-op. I've worked on developing housing cooperatives. They're not easy. And there's also policy things that we really need to support, because banks don't like to support a lot of those efforts as well. It's really challenging. Developing resources and connections to communities of folks who aren't citizens and who face really unique circumstances and need support as well. I mean, there's a huge list, and I realize this is a lightning round. We can create policy papers, but really share the message. How do we bring farmers and their voices to places that they're not? Intersectional conversations, and how do we bring those conversations to farmers to make them feel heard, to give them an outlet, to give them the potential to dream and create the future that they need and want.
Graham, thank you very much. Mary, let's hear your closing comments.
Sure, thanks. So in relationship to the comment about cooperatives and communal land ownership, we see a lot of interest. A lot of the farmers that I'm working with do not have stable land tenure, and this is a huge barrier to their longevity in farming and their stability in the industry. And there's certainly some cool models out there. I was at a meeting earlier this week with a land trust that's looking to establish a community farm with some immigrant farmers from the Hmong community down in Morganton, North Carolina. And it's happening everywhere as far as I can tell. And I think that these are stories that should be shared and told, because people who have access to land might want to know about what other things can happen on their own land. I will say, in response overall to this question about connection in general, this is a social epidemic, right? Our Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, talks about it. And I think that I would love to see us think about farms as a solution to that problem, because the people that I know who are coming into farming, they want to recreate communities in rural spaces and urban spaces around agriculture. And so how do we do that? I think there's a lot of ways.
Mary, thank you very much. Adam, you've got a couple minutes. Let's hear what you have to say to finish up.
I really love what Mary said there at the end. And I think that's at the end of the day, it's what we're all talking about. It's talking about there's people in agriculture, farm families, farmers, farm wives, farm children, farm partners. They strive for community and they want community. And that's one of the massive reasons why we're all attracted to, whether it's urban or rural, right? Or wherever you are, right? We love community and we love and we all see the potential of it. And, whatever the specific things that and issues, there's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of them and they're the same everywhere in agriculture and for rural communities. And there is an opportunity to say, like, we can do better and we should do better. I'm looking forward to the rest of this, this conference today to see and hear about, like, how do we get there? And thank you all for being a part of this.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm going to turn this back over because we're a little over time, but thank you for this opportunity and thank you everybody for showing up and being part of this discussion.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you all of our panelists for sharing your insights, getting us started with a fantastic discussion. To join our next session, Farm Families Persistence and Wellbeing, please return to the Event Hub and click on the View Session button for that next session. Note the next session is a Zoom meeting, so it will open as such for all participants as opposed to the live stream model that we've had going for this opening session. So with that, we will end this session and look forward to seeing you again